Most people think the story ends the moment a narcissist realizes they can no longer control you. That is the biggest mistake many people make. The moment you stop reacting, stop chasing forward, and stop giving them emotional power is often the moment something far more dangerous begins. Forward. There is one final psychological move that many narcissists save until they believe every other strategy has failed. It is quiet. It is calculated. Forward. It often looks like kindness instead of manipulation. It can look like regret instead of control. It can even feel like the closure you have been waiting for. Forward. That is exactly why so many intelligent, emotionally aware people fall into the trap without realizing it. By the time they recognize what happened, forward, they are already pulled back into the same painful cycle they worked so hard to escape. Forward. The truth is that this final tactic is rarely discussed in a way that explains the psychology behind it. Most conversations focus on obvious manipulation, such as lying, blame, anger, forward, or emotional abuse. Those behaviors are easier to recognize. The last move is different. It is built on patience. It is built on timing. Forward. It appears only after the narcissist realizes that fear no longer works, guilt no longer works, and emotional pressure no longer works. That is when the game changes completely. Forward. The goal is no longer to force you into submission. The goal becomes something much more subtle. They want to regain psychological control without looking controlling at all. Forward. In this video, you will learn why this happens, what psychological trigger pushes a narcissist toward this final move, and how to recognize it before it pulls you back into confusion. Forward. You will discover why many people mistake manipulation for personal growth, why fake vulnerability can be one of the strongest forms of emotional control. Forward. And why the strongest people often become the biggest targets. Most importantly, you will learn how to protect yourself without becoming cold, bitter, or emotionally closed off. Forward. Stay until the end because the final lesson may completely change the way you interpret apologies. Unexpected kindness. Forward. And sudden attempts to reconnect after months or even years of silence. Forward. To understand this pattern, it is important to understand one fact that many people never learn. Narcissistic relationships are rarely built on genuine emotional intimacy. Forward. They are built on control. Real intimacy requires honesty, vulnerability, accountability, and mutual respect. Control requires something entirely different. Forward. It depends on emotional influence. It depends on keeping another person uncertain, seeking approval, questioning themselves, or constantly trying to repair the relationship. Forward. When someone can shape your emotions, they often gain the ability to shape your decisions as well. That psychological influence becomes the center of the relationship. Forward. This does not mean every narcissist consciously plans every action in advance. Human behavior is often more complicated than that. Forward. Many narcissistic behaviors become automatic patterns developed over many years. Forward. Psychological research on narcissistic personality traits suggests that maintaining a stable sense of superiority and protecting self-esteem often become central motivations. Forward. When that self-image feels threatened, defensive behaviors can appear quickly. Those behaviors are not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes they are quiet, charming, forward, or unexpectedly emotional. That is why they are so difficult to identify. One of the least understood ideas in psychology is something called narcissistic injury. Forward. Despite the dramatic name, it is not a physical injury. It is a deep psychological wound that occurs when the narcissist experiences rejection, criticism, loss of admiration, or loss of control. Their carefully protected self-image suddenly feels unstable. For most people, rejection is painful but manageable. They process the disappointment, reflect on the situation, and eventually move forward. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, the experience can feel much more threatening because it challenges the identity they work so hard to protect. This explains something that often confuses people after leaving a narcissistic relationship. They wonder why the narcissist suddenly changes after months of ignoring them. They wonder why someone who seemed completely indifferent suddenly becomes emotional, apologetic, or unusually kind. Many assume love finally returned. Others believe guilt finally appeared. In reality, the timing often tells a different story. The change frequently begins only after the narcissist realizes they have truly lost influence. That realization creates pressure inside them. They no longer feel powerful. They no longer feel certain they can predict your next move. That uncertainty becomes deeply uncomfortable. One of the strongest threats to a narcissist is not anger. It is confidence. Confidence removes the need for constant approval. Emotional independence removes the need to explain yourself. Clear boundaries remove opportunities for manipulation. A person who quietly says no and continues living peacefully becomes extremely difficult to control. There are no emotional explosions to exploit. There are no endless arguments to twist. There is no desperate need for validation to manipulate. Calm confidence creates something the narcissist often struggles to handle. It creates unpredictability. That is why many survivors notice a strange pattern. The more emotionally stable they become, the more unusual the narcissist's behavior appears. Instead of moving away permanently, they sometimes return with unexpected warmth. Instead of attacking directly, they may suddenly become understanding. Instead of demanding attention, they may quietly remind you of happy memories. On the surface, these actions seem positive. Underneath, they can serve a very different purpose. The goal is not always love. The goal can be testing whether they still have access to your emotions. Many people miss this because they naturally believe emotional vulnerability is a sign of sincerity. In healthy relationships, that assumption often makes sense. Honest vulnerability strengthens trust. Honest accountability repairs damage. Honest remorse creates healing. But when vulnerability becomes a strategy instead of genuine emotional growth, the result looks almost identical from the outside. That is why emotionally intelligent people can become vulnerable to this final manipulation. They see the behavior they have always hoped for. They believe change has finally arrived. They lower their guard at the exact moment the psychological game becomes most sophisticated. Another lesser-known fact is that manipulation often becomes more subtle as direct control becomes less effective. Early in the relationship, pressure may be obvious. Later, emotional influence becomes quieter. The narcissist studies your values, your empathy, your hope, and your desire for peace. They recognize that force no longer works. So they begin using your strengths against you. Your compassion becomes an opening. Your forgiveness becomes an opportunity. Your emotional maturity becomes something they expect to guide you back toward them. This is why strength alone is not enough. Strength without awareness can still be exploited. The most important question is not whether a narcissist comes back. The more important question is why they come back when they finally realize they cannot dominate you anymore. Forward. That answer reveals one of the most fascinating and misunderstood patterns in human psychology. The final move is rarely random. It follows a predictable emotional process. Forward. Once you recognize that process, many confusing experiences suddenly begin to make sense. Words that once sounded convincing begin to sound different. Forward. Behaviors that once seemed loving begin to reveal another purpose. The emotional fog starts to disappear. Forward. By the end of this video, you will understand why this last dirty trick can feel so convincing, why even emotionally strong people sometimes fall for it. Forward. And how recognizing the pattern can protect your peace, your confidence, and your future relationships. Forward. You will also learn why true freedom begins when someone no longer has the power to control your emotional world. Welcome to the channel. Forward. If you enjoy thoughtful psychology explained in a simple and practical way, make sure to subscribe and join our community. Forward. Because every video is designed to help you recognize hidden emotional patterns, protect your peace, and build stronger, healthier relationships. Forward. One of the greatest misunderstandings about narcissistic behavior is the belief that strength scares a narcissist because they fear confrontation. That is rarely the real reason. Forward. Many narcissists are not intimidated by loud arguments, emotional outbursts, or direct conflict. In fact, those reactions often give them exactly what they need. Forward. Strong emotions reveal where your attention is focused. They reveal your fears, your hopes, and your emotional limits. Every angry message, every desperate explanation. Forward. Every attempt to prove your innocence provides information. Information becomes influence. Influence becomes control. Forward. This is why emotional reactions are so valuable to someone who depends on psychological power. The goal is not simply to upset you. The goal is to predict you. Forward. Once someone can accurately predict your emotional response, they can often predict your next decision as well. Forward. This explains why many narcissistic relationships begin with such intense emotional highs and painful emotional lows. At first, there may be affection, admiration, forward, and attention that feels almost overwhelming. Then confusion slowly replaces certainty. Small criticisms appear. Mixed signals become common. Forward. Affection disappears without warning and returns just when you begin to pull away. These shifts are rarely random. They create emotional instability. Forward. A stable mind makes careful decisions. An emotionally exhausted mind often makes desperate ones. Forward. That difference becomes extremely important because a person searching for emotional relief becomes easier to influence. Forward. Psychologists often describe this pattern as intermittent reinforcement. It is one of the strongest learning systems found in human behavior. Forward. Rewards that arrive unpredictably create stronger emotional attachment than rewards that arrive consistently. This principle has been observed in many areas of behavioral science. Forward. It explains why uncertainty keeps people emotionally invested even when the experience causes pain. Forward. Many survivors later realized they spent more energy trying to recover the good moments than questioning why those good moments disappeared in the first place. Forward. The relationship slowly becomes less about love and more about chasing emotional certainty. Everything changes when that cycle stops working. Forward. Emotional independence interrupts the entire system. A person who no longer depends on the narcissist for approval becomes extremely difficult to manipulate. Forward. This does not mean they stop feeling emotions. It means those emotions no longer control their decisions. They stop searching for permission to trust themselves. Forward. They stop measuring their worth through someone else's attention. They no longer believe every silence requires an explanation, or every accusation requires a defense. Forward. That quiet shift changes the balance of power more than most people realize. Forward. One of the clearest differences between emotional dependence and emotional freedom is the need for validation. Forward. Someone who still seeks validation often feels driven to prove they are kind, loyal, honest, or worthy of love. They want the narcissist to finally understand them. Forward. They believe one more conversation might fix everything. One more explanation might remove every misunderstanding. One more act of patience might finally bring peace. Forward. These hopes feel natural because healthy relationships often improve through honest communication. Unfortunately, manipulation follows different rules. Forward. Endless explanations frequently provide more opportunities for control instead of creating understanding. Forward. Someone who has emotionally detached behaves very differently. They no longer feel responsible for changing another person's perception. Forward. They recognize that false accusations do not require endless defense. They understand that constant misunderstanding is sometimes intentional rather than accidental. Forward. They stop chasing closure from someone committed to keeping them emotionally uncertain. This does not happen overnight. It often develops after months or years of disappointment. Forward. The change is usually quiet. There is no dramatic announcement. There is simply a growing decision to protect personal peace instead of winning endless emotional battles. Forward. That quiet decision creates something many narcissists struggle to tolerate. It creates uncertainty. Boundaries introduce uncertainty because they remove predictability. Forward. A clear boundary says your usual methods no longer produce the same result. The familiar emotional patterns disappear. The person who once argued now remains calm. Forward. The person who once begged now walks away. The person who once accepted blame now simply refuses the conversation. Every boundary sends the same message without speaking many words. Forward. Your influence ends here. This uncertainty often feels deeply uncomfortable because many narcissists build their confidence around their ability to affect other people. Forward. Their sense of stability can become connected to the belief that they can shape another person's emotions whenever necessary. Losing that ability creates psychological pressure. Forward. They begin questioning strategies that once seemed reliable. They test different behaviors. They become unusually attentive one day and emotionally distant the next. Forward. They search for the reaction that used to arrive so easily. When it does not appear, frustration quietly grows. Many people assume anger is the strongest emotional response. Forward. Surprisingly, calmness often creates a much greater impact. Anger still confirms emotional investment. It shows the relationship continues to occupy space inside your mind. Forward. Calmness communicates something entirely different. Calmness suggests emotional freedom. Forward. It suggests that your inner stability no longer depends on another person's approval or rejection. Forward. That message is far more difficult for a narcissist to process because it removes the emotional leverage they once relied upon. Forward. There is another surprising reason calmness feels so threatening. Calm behavior forces responsibility back onto the manipulator. Arguments create distractions. Forward. Emotional chaos shifts attention away from the original problem. Silence and composure remove those distractions. Suddenly there is nothing left to fight against. Forward. Nothing left to twist. Nothing left to provoke. The emotional stage becomes empty. For someone accustomed to directing every emotional scene, that silence can feel unsettling. Forward. Researchers who study narcissistic traits often note that threats to status, admiration, or control activate powerful defensive responses. These responses may include denial, forward, blame shifting, projection, or attempts to restore a damaged self-image. Beneath those behaviors lies a deeper fear that many people never see. Forward. Losing psychological control can feel like losing part of the identity they spent years protecting. If they believe their value comes from being admired, obeyed, forward, or emotionally powerful, then your independence challenges far more than the relationship itself. It challenges the story they tell themselves about who they are. Forward. That is why your strength is never just about your confidence. To them, it becomes evidence that their influence is disappearing. Forward. And that realization begins to set the stage for the next move. Forward. There comes a point in many narcissistic relationships when something changes so quietly that almost nobody notices it at first. The words may sound the same. Forward. The conversations may follow familiar patterns. The daily routine may even appear normal from the outside. But beneath the surface, the emotional balance begins to shift. Forward. The narcissist senses it before anyone else does. They realize the usual methods are no longer producing the same results. Forward. That realization often marks the beginning of a completely different psychological game. Forward. One of the first warning signs is surprisingly simple. You stop defending yourself against every false accusation. Earlier in the relationship, every unfair statement felt urgent. Forward. You wanted the truth to matter. You explained your intentions. You corrected misunderstandings. You searched for the perfect words that would finally make everything clear. Forward. Many people believe honesty naturally solves conflict because that is how healthy relationships often work. But manipulation does not depend on truth. Forward. It depends on keeping another person emotionally engaged. Endless explanations provide exactly that. Psychologists sometimes describe this pattern as defensive engagement. Forward. The more energy you spend proving your innocence, the more emotionally invested you remain. Forward. Every explanation becomes another opportunity for the narcissist to move the conversation somewhere else. A simple disagreement suddenly becomes an argument about your personality. Forward. An accusation becomes a debate about your memory. A broken promise somehow becomes your responsibility. Forward. The original issue slowly disappears while you become trapped, defending yourself against claims that never should have required a defense. Then something unexpected happens. Forward. You stop participating. Someone accuses you of being selfish, and instead of writing a long emotional response, you simply remain calm. Someone twists your words. Forward. And you refuse to enter another exhausting debate. That silence often speaks louder than any argument ever could. To a narcissist, it sends a powerful message. Forward. Their usual strategy no longer controls your emotional direction. Another major sign appears when you stop chasing explanations and apologies. Earlier, forward, unanswered questions felt unbearable. You wanted to understand every mixed signal. You wanted to know why affection disappeared without warning. Forward. You searched for hidden meaning behind every message and every period of silence. Your mind stayed busy trying to solve an emotional puzzle that seemed to change every day. Forward. This search for answers often keeps people emotionally attached far longer than they realize. Human beings naturally seek closure. The brain dislikes uncertainty. Researchers studying emotional attachment have found that unresolved experiences remain active in the mind much longer than completed ones. That is one reason inconsistent relationships become so difficult to leave behind. The unanswered questions continue demanding attention. Eventually, emotional exhaustion changes something inside you. Instead of searching for explanations, you begin accepting uncertainty. You realize not every question receives an honest answer. Not every apology reflects genuine accountability. Not every emotional conversation leads to healing. This shift feels small from your perspective, but it creates enormous psychological consequences for the narcissist. They expected you to keep searching. Instead, you begin moving forward without the answers they once used to keep you emotionally connected. Emotional reassurance also loses its power. Earlier, one kind message could erase weeks of confusion. A brief apology could restart hope. A promise about the future could temporarily quiet every doubt. Now, those same words feel strangely empty. You begin paying more attention to patterns than promises. You notice actions instead of speeches. Consistency becomes more valuable than charm. This change removes one of the narcissist's strongest tools, because emotional influence depends on your willingness to believe future words over repeated behavior. Soon another pattern begins to emerge. Their usual tactics stop producing visible reactions. Criticism no longer starts long arguments. Silent treatment no longer creates panic. Jealousy no longer forces reassurance. Emotional distance no longer sends you chasing after them. From the outside, these changes appear subtle. From the narcissist's perspective, they feel deeply unsettling. This is where many people become confused. They expect the narcissist to simply walk away after losing influence. Instead, the opposite often happens. The narcissist starts testing the emotional connection in small, calculated ways. They may suddenly send an unexpected message after weeks of silence. They may mention an old memory that once meant everything to both of you. They may create situations designed to spark jealousy or curiosity. Sometimes they appear unusually friendly. Other times they become strangely cold without any obvious reason. These tests are rarely random. They function like emotional experiments. The narcissist wants information. They want to know whether your feelings remain accessible. They watch carefully for even the smallest emotional reaction. A quick reply, a defensive explanation, a burst of anger, a sign of guilt. Even disappointment can become proof that emotional influence still exists. One lesser-known fact about manipulation is that uncertainty often increases when control begins slipping away. Instead of following one clear strategy, the narcissist may rapidly switch between completely different behaviors. One day they appear affectionate and understanding. The next day they seem distant or dismissive. Then they suddenly become emotional, nostalgic, or unexpectedly vulnerable. This inconsistency is not always carefully planned. Sometimes it reflects genuine internal instability. They are searching for the emotional key that still unlocks your attention. Their communication becomes increasingly confusing because confusion itself can become useful. Mixed messages keep people mentally occupied. A warm conversation followed by complete silence encourages endless analysis. The brain naturally searches for patterns. It tries to explain contradictions. It wants certainty where none exists. Forward. Many people spend weeks analyzing a few confusing messages while the narcissist quietly observes every emotional response. Forward. Then something happens that many narcissists find surprisingly difficult to handle. You stop reacting altogether. Not because you no longer care about yourself, forward, but because you finally care about your peace more than another endless emotional battle. Your silence no longer comes from fear. It comes from clarity. Forward. There is a profound psychological difference between those two forms of silence. Forward. Silence created by fear usually waits for permission to speak. Silence created by strength no longer seeks permission from anyone. That difference changes everything. Forward. Emotional confrontation still provides information. It confirms investment. It confirms the relationship remains emotionally active. Forward. Calm emotional silence provides almost nothing to work with. There is no argument to redirect, no emotion to amplify, no weakness to explore. Forward. For someone who has relied on emotional predictability for a long time, this silence can create more anxiety than open conflict ever did. Conflict still feels familiar. Forward. Silence filled with emotional certainty does not. It leaves the narcissist facing something they have tried to avoid from the beginning of the relationship. Forward. The possibility that they are no longer shaping your emotional world, and once that realization begins settling in, their behavior often becomes even more unexpected. Forward. This is the moment many people never expect. The anger fades, the blame becomes quieter, the obvious manipulation seems to disappear. Then, almost without warning, the narcissist returns in a completely different form. They sound calmer. They appear more thoughtful. Their words suddenly carry emotion that was missing before. Forward. They admit small mistakes. They speak about personal growth. They say they finally understand your pain. They may even thank you for everything you did. Forward. To someone who has spent months hoping for accountability, this can feel like the breakthrough they always wanted. Forward. But this is often where the final and most sophisticated psychological move begins. Forward. One of the least understood facts about manipulation is that it does not always wear an aggressive face. Some of the strongest forms of manipulation arrive wrapped in humility. Forward. They look like honesty. They sound like maturity. They create the feeling that everything is finally changing. This is why manufactured closure becomes so effective. Forward. Instead of fighting against your boundaries, the narcissist appears to respect them. Instead of demanding another chance, they simply say they want peace. Forward. Instead of defending themselves, they admit just enough fault to lower your emotional guard. The entire emotional atmosphere changes, and that change itself becomes the strategy. Forward. This does not mean every apology from a person with narcissistic traits is automatically false. Human behavior exists on a spectrum. Forward. And people can genuinely change through deep self-awareness, accountability, and long-term effort. The difference is found in consistency. Forward. Real change continues even when it brings no immediate reward. Manufactured change usually appears when influence has been lost. Forward. The timing often tells a more honest story than the words themselves. This is where fake accountability becomes a surprisingly powerful control strategy. Forward. The narcissist may admit to mistakes that are already obvious while quietly avoiding the deeper patterns that cause the damage. They may say, "I was difficult," forward, but never acknowledge years of emotional manipulation. They may apologize for one argument while ignoring repeated cycles of disrespect, blame shifting, or emotional neglect. Forward. This creates the illusion of accountability without requiring genuine responsibility. Psychologists sometimes describe this as partial confession. By admitting smaller faults. Forward. A person appears trustworthy while protecting the larger narrative they want others to believe. Forward. The listener naturally feels relief because some responsibility has finally been accepted. That relief can become emotionally disarming. Forward. The conversation shifts away from the complete history of the relationship and toward the possibility of a hopeful future. Forward. The focus quietly changes from accountability to forgiveness. Soon, the emotional bait becomes even stronger. The narcissist begins reminding you of beautiful memories. Forward. They mention special moments only the two of you shared. They speak about dreams that were never fulfilled. They recall promises, vacations, quiet conversations, birthdays, forward, or difficult times you survived together. None of these memories are necessarily false. That is exactly why they are so persuasive. Forward. They are carefully selected pieces of reality presented without the full context surrounding them. Forward. This selective honesty creates a powerful emotional illusion. Forward. Your mind naturally returns to the happiest moments while temporarily forgetting the repeated emotional pain that followed. Memory does not always function like a perfect recording. Forward. Emotion influences what feels most important. Researchers studying memory have found that emotionally significant experiences often become easier to recall than ordinary daily events. Forward. A skilled manipulator understands this instinctively. They do not need to invent a completely different past. Forward. They only need to highlight the parts that support the story they want you to believe. Promises soon follow. This time, everything will be different. Forward. This time, communication will improve. This time, they finally understand your value. They speak about counseling, personal growth, spiritual change, forward, or lessons learned through losing you. Every sentence seems designed to answer the questions you once begged them to address. Forward. The words sound almost perfect because they are often built from the very conversations you shared throughout the relationship. They listened more carefully than you realized. Forward. Not always to understand your needs, but sometimes to store information that could later become emotional leverage. Forward. Another psychological force quietly strengthens this entire process. Intermittent reinforcement does not disappear after the relationship becomes unhealthy. Forward. It often becomes even stronger during moments of separation. Long periods of emotional distance followed by sudden kindness create a dramatic emotional contrast. Forward. The unexpected warmth feels more meaningful because it arrives after prolonged pain. The brain notices contrast. Relief feels stronger after suffering. Forward. Hope feels brighter after disappointment. That emotional shift can temporarily silence logical thinking. Many survivors later describe this stage as feeling almost unreal. Forward. They know something feels different, yet they also feel strangely drawn back toward the connection. This reaction does not mean they are weak. Forward. Trauma researchers have explained that repeated cycles of emotional pain, followed by relief, can create powerful attachment patterns. Forward. The body begins associating relief with the very person who caused the distress. Breaking that pattern requires much more than simple willpower. Forward. At the same time, the narcissist often begins quietly rewriting the history of the relationship. They speak as though both people simply made equal mistakes. Forward. Serious manipulation becomes ordinary misunderstanding. Repeated emotional harm becomes mutual conflict. Forward. Years of imbalance become described as a relationship that merely struggled because both partners were imperfect. This rewritten version sounds balanced and reasonable on the surface, which makes it especially convincing. This tactic also reaches directly into empathy. Compassionate people naturally want to believe in growth. They want healing to be possible. They feel guilty for walking away from someone who now appears broken or deeply remorseful. Hope begins competing with memory. Empathy begins competing with self-protection. Old emotional wounds that never fully healed quietly reopen. The desire for closure returns. The wish to believe returns. Even the smallest possibility that this version of the person is genuine can become emotionally overwhelming. Yet beneath all these emotional shifts lies another objective that often remains hidden. The deepest goal is not always rebuilding the relationship itself. In many cases, the greater reward comes from restoring psychological dominance. Receiving another chance confirms influence still exists. Receiving an emotional response proves the connection remains active. Even rejection can provide satisfaction if it comes wrapped in strong emotion, because it confirms they still occupy space inside your emotional world. That is why this final trick feels so different from every manipulation that came before. It is quieter. It is softer. It asks for very little at first. It simply invites one conversation, one meeting, one message, or one moment of understanding. Beneath that calm surface, however, another process has already begun, and the outcome depends entirely on whether the old patterns regain their place or whether the loss of control becomes too painful for the narcissist to accept. When the final attempt fails, something important happens beneath the surface. The narcissist is no longer dealing with the loss of a relationship alone. They are facing the loss of influence. Those are two very different experiences. Many people assume rejection hurts simply because someone feels lonely or heartbroken. For a person with strong narcissistic traits, the deeper wound often comes from realizing that the emotional control they once depended on is no longer working. This creates a much stronger form of narcissistic injury. The carefully protected image of being powerful, desirable, or emotionally untouchable begins to crack. And that internal pressure often pushes their behavior in new and surprising directions. One lesser-known fact in psychology is that people who rely heavily on external admiration often experience setbacks differently than those whose self-worth comes from within. When confidence depends on constant validation, rejection does not simply feel disappointing. It can feel like a direct attack on identity. This is why a narcissist may react far more intensely than the situation appears to justify. From the outside, it may seem like a simple breakup, a boundary, or a refusal to continue unhealthy patterns. Inside their emotional world, it can feel like a public collapse of the identity they have spent years trying to maintain. The first response is often blame. Accepting responsibility would require acknowledging that another person walked away because of repeated harmful behavior. That realization threatens the image they desperately want to preserve. Instead, responsibility is redirected. Suddenly, you become the selfish one. You become the unforgiving one. You become the person who refused to communicate, who abandoned the relationship, or who never truly cared. This process is known as blame shifting, and it serves an important psychological purpose. It protects the narcissist from facing painful truths about themselves. Forward. Closely connected to blame shifting is projection. Feelings they cannot tolerate within themselves are assigned to someone else. Their dishonesty becomes your dishonesty. Forward. Their manipulation becomes your manipulation. Their emotional coldness becomes proof that you lacked compassion. Forward. This reversal can feel deeply confusing because the accusations often resemble the very behaviors they displayed throughout the relationship. Forward. Survivors frequently spend months questioning their own memory because the story becomes repeated with such confidence that it begins to sound believable. Forward. If direct blame does not restore their sense of control, the situation may escalate into something even more damaging. One common tactic is the smear campaign. Forward. This does not always involve dramatic lies. In many cases, it relies on selective truth mixed with carefully omitted details. Forward. They tell others about one argument, but never explain the months of emotional pressure that came before it. Forward. They describe your reaction while hiding the repeated behavior that caused it. This creates a story that sounds reasonable because parts of it are technically true. Forward. The missing context changes everything. Human beings naturally form opinions based on incomplete information. Forward. Researchers studying social judgment have found that first impressions and emotionally charged stories strongly influence how people interpret later information. Forward. A narcissist often understands this instinctively. By shaping the narrative early, forward, they increase the chances that future explanations from you will sound defensive instead of truthful. The goal is not always to convince everyone. Forward. The goal is to create enough uncertainty that their public image remains protected. Another strategy that frequently appears is triangulation. Instead of communicating directly, forward, they involve other people. Friends, family members, coworkers, or even new romantic partners suddenly become part of the emotional equation. Information is shared selectively. Forward. Comparisons begin appearing. Someone new is praised in ways designed to provoke jealousy. Mutual acquaintances receive carefully crafted versions of the story. Forward. This creates emotional confusion while allowing the narcissist to avoid direct accountability. Forward. Sometimes the response moves in the opposite direction. Instead of becoming louder, they become completely silent. Many people mistake this silence for acceptance. In reality, forward, silent punishment can become another attempt to regain influence. The expectation is that uncertainty will slowly pull you back into emotional engagement. Forward. They hope curiosity will replace clarity. They hope unanswered questions will become stronger than your boundaries. This strategy often worked in the past, forward, which is why it returns even after the relationship has changed. As these efforts continue, protecting their public image becomes increasingly important. Forward. Reputation often functions as emotional armor. If enough people continue seeing them as charming, generous, misunderstood, or unfairly treated, forward, they can preserve the identity that rejection threatened. This explains why some narcissists appear surprisingly calm in public while expressing intense anger in private. Forward. The public performance becomes part of maintaining psychological stability. At the same time, they usually begin searching for new sources of validation. Admiration, attention, forward. An emotional investment from other people help reduce the discomfort created by losing influence over you. This does not necessarily mean they have emotionally moved on. Forward. External validation often functions like temporary relief rather than genuine healing. New relationships, increased social activity, exaggerated success. Forward. Or constant displays of happiness may all serve the same purpose. They help rebuild the image that rejection damaged. Forward. One surprising detail is that these displays are not always directed at the new people in their lives. Sometimes they are directed at you. Photographs, achievements. Forward. Exciting announcements or carefully timed updates can become indirect messages. The purpose is often to communicate one idea without saying it directly. Forward. They want you to believe they remain successful, admired, and emotionally unaffected. Whether those appearances reflect reality is often a very different question. Forward. As their influence continues fading, another shift frequently appears. They begin presenting themselves as the true victim. According to their version of events, they loved too deeply. Forward. They trusted the wrong person. They gave everything and received nothing in return. This role offers two important advantages. First, it attracts sympathy from others. Second, forward, it protects them from confronting the role they played in the relationship's collapse. Victimhood becomes another shield against accountability. Yet beneath every accusation, forward, every public performance, every new relationship, and every carefully crafted story lies the same frustration. None of these actions restore the one thing they truly lost. Forward. They can influence opinions. They can shape conversations. They can gather admiration from new people. Forward. But they cannot easily recreate the emotional access they once had to your inner world. The realization that your decisions, your peace, forward, and your emotional reality no longer revolve around them becomes the hardest truth to accept, because that loss cannot be repaired through charm, anger, blame, or performance. Forward. It can only be faced, and that is the one challenge they have been trying to avoid from the very beginning. Forward. The greatest mistake many people make after escaping a narcissistic relationship is believing they still need to win. They want the narcissist to finally admit the truth. Forward. They want justice. They want an apology that explains every painful moment. They want everyone else to recognize what really happened. Those desires are completely understandable. Forward. Pain naturally searches for resolution. But there is a hidden danger in making your healing depend on another person's behavior. As long as your peace depends on their response, forward, a part of your emotional life still remains connected to them. True strength begins when your recovery no longer requires their cooperation. Forward. One of the most surprising lessons in psychology is that emotional neutrality often has more power than revenge. Revenge keeps attention focused on the past. Forward. It keeps the nervous system connected to the conflict. Even when revenge succeeds, forward, it rarely creates lasting peace because the mind remains emotionally attached to the person it wants to defeat. Emotional neutrality is different. Forward. It does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means refusing to let another person's behavior decide your emotional direction. Their words no longer define your mood. Forward. Their opinions no longer define your value. Their attempts to provoke no longer determine your next decision. Forward. That quiet emotional freedom removes the very influence they spent so much time trying to build. Many narcissists expect one of two reactions. They expect you to fight, forward, or they expect you to surrender. Emotional neutrality gives them neither. There is no dramatic confrontation. There is no desperate pursuit. There is simply calm consistency. Forward. This response often feels confusing to someone who depends on predictable emotional patterns because there is nothing left to manipulate. Forward. The emotional cycle finally stops receiving new energy. This is why consistent boundaries become so important. A boundary is not a punishment. Forward. It is not an attempt to control another person. It is a decision about how you will protect your own well-being. Forward. Healthy boundaries remain steady, whether another person approves of them or not. They are not based on temporary emotions. They are based on long-term self-respect. Forward. Many people struggle with boundaries because they confuse kindness with unlimited access. They fear disappointing others. They fear appearing selfish. They fear being misunderstood. Forward. A narcissist often recognizes these fears and quietly uses them as pressure points. They may accuse you of being uncaring. They may question your loyalty. Forward. They may suggest that your boundaries prove you never truly loved them. These statements are designed to make you abandon your own limits in order to restore emotional comfort. Forward. Strong people respond differently. They understand that another person's disappointment does not automatically mean they have done something wrong. Forward. They recognize that guilt and responsibility are not the same thing. Feeling guilty does not always mean you are guilty. Forward. This distinction becomes one of the most powerful forms of emotional protection because manipulation frequently depends on confusing those two experiences. Forward. Another major change appears in the way emotionally healthy people handle conflict. They stop believing every accusation deserves a response. Earlier in the relationship, forward, silence may have felt like weakness. Later, they discover that silence can become wisdom. Refusing to argue removes one of the narcissist's strongest sources of emotional leverage. Forward. Every unnecessary argument creates another opportunity for blame shifting, emotional confusion, and psychological exhaustion. Walking away from that cycle is not avoidance. Forward. It is recognizing when communication has stopped serving the truth. Forward. One lesser-known fact about emotional manipulation is that words often become more convincing when people desperately want them to be true. Hope changes perception. Forward. A beautiful promise can temporarily outweigh years of contradictory behavior. That is why truly strong people learn to trust patterns instead of speeches. Forward. They observe consistency over time. They pay attention to repeated actions rather than emotional performances. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone. Forward. Healthy relationships deserve openness and trust. The difference is that trust grows through repeated evidence. It does not grow through perfect speeches alone. Forward. Someone who genuinely changes demonstrates that change consistently, even when no reward is guaranteed. They accept responsibility without demanding immediate forgiveness. Forward. They respect boundaries without trying to negotiate them away. Their actions remain stable long after difficult conversations have ended. Forward. Healing also requires understanding something many survivors overlook. The deepest wound is often not the breakup itself. Forward. It is the trauma bond created through repeated cycles of emotional pain, followed by emotional relief. Forward. Trauma bonds are powerful because the nervous system begins associating moments of comfort with the same person who caused the distress. Forward. This creates confusing emotional cravings that many people mistake for love. Breaking that bond requires patience. Forward. It requires allowing the nervous system to experience safety without constant emotional chaos. At first, peace may even feel unfamiliar. Forward. Some survivors describe healthy stability as strangely empty because they became accustomed to emotional intensity. This reaction is more common than many people realize. Forward. Healing is not simply learning to avoid unhealthy people. Healing is teaching the mind and body that calmness is not boredom. Calmness is safety. Forward. One of the most important parts of recovery is rebuilding self-trust. Manipulation often damages confidence in your own judgment. You begin questioning your memory, your instincts, forward, and your perceptions. You replay conversations over and over, searching for mistakes. You wonder whether you misunderstood everything. Forward. Rebuilding self-trust means slowly believing your own observations again. It means accepting that your feelings deserve attention. Forward. It means recognizing warning signs without immediately explaining them away. This process takes time because self-trust grows through repeated experiences. Forward. Every healthy boundary strengthens it. Every decision that protects your peace strengthens it. Every moment you choose clarity over confusion strengthens it. Gradually, forward, you stop asking whether someone else approves of your choices. You begin asking whether your choices align with your values, your emotional health, and your future. Forward. That is where genuine strength reveals itself. It is not measured by winning arguments or exposing every lie. It is not measured by making the narcissist regret losing you. Forward. Those victories are temporary because they still depend on another person's reaction. Real strength is measured by emotional stability. Forward. It is measured by the ability to remain grounded when someone tries to create chaos. It is measured by choosing peace instead of proving a point. Forward. The greatest freedom arrives when another person's manipulation no longer determines how you think, how you feel, or how you see yourself. Forward. Because at that moment, the psychological game finally loses its power and your life begins to move in a completely different direction. By now, one truth should be much clearer. Forward. The narcissist's final move is often not a sign of deep personal transformation. It is a reaction to losing something they believed would always belong to them. Forward. That something is not always the relationship itself. It is the ability to influence your emotions, shape your decisions, and pull you back whenever they choose. Forward. When that influence disappears, many narcissists change their strategy. They stop pushing from the front and begin pulling from behind. They replace pressure with sympathy. Forward. They replace blame with carefully measured regret. They replace obvious control with emotional confusion. That is why this final trick can be the hardest one to recognize. Forward. Real strength does not appear in one dramatic moment. It grows quietly through daily choices. It grows every time you keep a healthy boundary. Forward. It grows every time you trust actions more than promises. It grows every time you refuse to explain your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Forward. Emotional clarity becomes your greatest protection because manipulation depends on confusion. The clearer your mind becomes, the weaker manipulation becomes. Forward. One of the biggest lessons from psychology is that unhealthy patterns survive only when they continue receiving emotional energy. Once you recognize those patterns, forward, you gain the power to step outside them. That does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop sacrificing your peace for someone else's need to feel powerful. Forward. There is a profound difference between closing your heart and protecting it wisely. Healing is not about becoming emotionally unavailable to love. Forward. It is about becoming emotionally unavailable to manipulation. If someone suddenly returns with perfect words, unexpected kindness, or emotional vulnerability, forward, pause before believing the performance. Watch for consistency. Watch for accountability that continues over time. Watch for respect that exists even when there is nothing to gain. Forward. Genuine change is never proven in one conversation. It is revealed through repeated actions. Your peace is valuable. Your confidence is valuable. Forward. Your ability to trust yourself again is one of the greatest victories you will ever achieve. Protect those things carefully because they are worth far more than temporary closure. Forward. If this video helped you understand these hidden psychological patterns, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Forward. Every new video is designed to help you recognize manipulation, build stronger emotional awareness, and protect your peace with knowledge instead of fear. Forward. Remember this above everything else. The moment someone can no longer control your emotions is the moment they can no longer control your life. That is where real freedom begins.